Hello and welcome to this video in the IBM Cloud Foundation Skills Series. And in this video, which is a lecture, I'm going to talk about security groups. Now this is quite an important subject, as security groups is a way to control the network traffic going to your virtual server. So assuming that you don't want any and all traffic to hit your server, then implementing security groups is a really good way to go. They're free of charge, so you don't pay for security groups, and you can attach them to any of your virtual server instances. But you can't use them with bare metal servers. That's something to note. So at a very high level, if you know nothing else about security groups, then you should at least know that a security group acts as a virtual firewall, can control the network traffic for one or more virtual servers, and it blocks or denies traffic by default. So if you don't know or you're not sure what a firewall is, well, they're devices, and they can be physical devices or software devices. Like these security groups. So security groups are really software devices, and they sit ahead of servers and filter traffic that goes to them based on a set of rules which you define. So for example, the firewall will look at an incoming network packet, determine the type and port destination as well as where it's coming from, and take action. So for example, suppose the firewall detects an HTTP packet destined for port 80. It may allow that, but if the request is going to port 8080, it may block it unless it comes from a particular IP address or address range who just happen to be, say, the system administrators. And you can do this for both incoming and outgoing traffic, or rather ingress and egress traffic, as it's more properly called. The other thing to remember about a security group is that you can set rules on either or both of the public network, so that's the network connected to the internet, or the private network, which is the internal IBM Cloud network connecting all your servers together. Now, there are a number of security groups that have been created by IBM, so these can save you a little bit of time when setting up your own. They're fairly self-explanatory by the names of them, and by the way, when you come to create your own security groups, make sure you give them meaningful names. So anyway, the ones that have been pre-created are allow SSH, which is on port 22, allow HTTP, which is on port 80, allow HTTPS on port 443, allow outbound is a rule that allows all egress or outbound traffic from the server, and allow all, which allows all ingress traffic or incoming traffic to the server. Now, of course, you can use these or you can create your own, and I'll of course show you how to create your own in the next lab. Let's think then of an example as to how this actually works in practice. So take a look at the diagram, and you can see that this represents a fairly typical three-tier application where we have a web layer, an application layer, and a database layer. Now, the diagram shows that the different layers each have their own security group. So there's a web layer security group, an application layer security group, and a database layer security group. And each of the VMs in each layer are members of their respective group. So in this example, the rules of the security group mean that the application developer can only access the web layer servers via port 443 through an allow HTTPS rule. They can't access the web layer servers through any other port, and the rules in the application security group and the database security group don't allow the developer any access either. The web layer servers are allowed access to the application layer security group, but are blocked from the database layer. This means that if there's some kind of compromise of the web layer, there's still no access to the database layer, and then the application layer is able to access the database layer. Now, as part of the rules, you can actually specify the name of the security group. So as soon as you place a server into a security group, for instance, if you add a server to the web layer, it will be able to access the application layer through the security group. So as I say, this is one way that you could implement a security groups for a three-tier application. Now let's have a closer look at some of the guidelines around rules when creating a security group. So first of all, each group will define a different set of rules. You can have up to 50 rules in a security group, so that gives you lots of combinations, but you don't really want to go and create a security group with identical rules. And don't forget, you should also make sure that you name any security groups so that you know what they're for and what they do, because that will make life a lot easier. Now, when you create a security group, by default, all outbound traffic is allowed, so basically the allow outbound rule is placed in the group. However, if you don't want this, then when you create the security group, you simply uncheck the Create Security Group with a default rule to allow all outbound traffic box. You then get a security group with no rules, which means that all inbound traffic and outbound traffic will be blocked. And this fits into the next point, that rules are permissive, meaning that they can only grant access, not take access away. So as I mentioned, if you have a security group with no rules, which is the default, you have no access, and it's only when you start to add rules that access is granted. The next thing to note is that changes to the group's rules are automatic and immediately applied to any new network connections. So if, for example, you add a rule that allows HTTP traffic to port 80, then HTTP traffic will immediately be able to access servers in the group on port 80. Similarly, if you were to remove, say, SSH access from the group, then immediately any new SSH connection request will be blocked. Now, an important thing to note there is new connections. If the connection is already made and there's a change, then the connection will persist. It won't be terminated by the security group. So this isn't a way to terminate any suspect connections. The next thing to note is that the order in which the rules appear on the list of rules does not matter. The bottom line is that priority is given to the least restrictive rule. Now, rules are also stateful, so this means that if you set a rule which allows inbound traffic, then the same rule will apply for outbound traffic too. Security groups do not override operating system firewalls. So if you have an operating system firewall which blocks traffic, then by opening the port on with a security group, the OS firewall will still block the traffic. And the last point to note in this section is that you need to make sure that your rules are compatible with any internal services that you might use. So for example, if you use NFS disk shares or you need access to update servers, then make sure that the rules you set in your security groups don't stop this. And a quick word on some of the interface considerations. So note that rules can apply to either the public, private or both of the network interfaces. So you may just want to apply rules to one or other of the networks or both at the same time. I should mention as well that you can apply rules to particular IP addresses or ranges. So for example, you could set up an SSH rule which allows access from a particular IP or range of IP addresses, and this could be a good way to secure access to a jump server which can then access other servers. You can refer to security groups in your rules as well. So in the jump server example, you might say that you'd allow SSH from the jump server security group. And the other point to note is that when you attach a security group to a network interface, i.e. a server for the first time, a restart of that interface is required. So once you've had that restart, any other changes you make to the rules will just immediately apply, so no restarts required. You can of course delete a security group when you no longer need it, but note that you can't delete a group that is assigned to a server. You need to make sure that no servers are using the group when you come to delete it, and this is to make sure you don't expose servers by mistake. And you also can't delete any groups that refer to in their rules by another group. So again, this is a bit of a backstop to make sure that you're not orphaning rules or removing rules that you might need to keep. Lastly, here are some limitations that you might need to consider when using security groups. So each network interface on a server can have up to 5 security groups attached, and you can create up to 500 security groups within your account. 50 is the limit on the number of rules that you can have in a single security group. Now, I'm not going to do the maths, but that means the number of combinations of rules that you can create is pretty impressive and should probably cover all the eventualities. You can have up to 5 remote rules in a security group, and a remote rule is one that specifies a security group as a source or destination. And you can attach a single security group to up to 100 different network interfaces. So that's it for this lecture. I hope you've learned a lot about security groups and are already thinking about ways in which you might use them. So in the next video, which is going to be a lab, I'll show you how to set up a security group, attach it to a virtual machine and have a bit of a play with them.